Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Maxwell Ivey. Max, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you having me on this show, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
It's very much my pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I am Maxwell Ivey. I'm a totally blind man who has gone from failed carnival owner to respected amusement equipment broker. And now I'm a self-help author, a motivational speaker, an online media publicist, a lot of other things. I'm a podcast host, and I'm currently working to launch a network to help other blind people start their own podcasts. The main thing you need to know about me is I did what I wanted to do all my life. I was part of my family's carnival business, or what y'all call a fun fair, over in the UK. I did that for 15 years until my dad's death. When he died, I fell into depression. Ended up, our carnival was not sustainable, so we had to join up with my uncle's show. Eventually, I realized I needed to do something on my own that I could have passion in again. And that led to me doing the only thing I knew, which was helping people sell used amusement equipment. And thankfully, I was able to do that. And, y'all sighted people said it was very inspirational, what I was doing to help other people sell used rides. And now, what I'm doing to help people in general, including getting my friends who have stories like mine booked on podcasts like yours.
Well, I do want to say I have a lot of admiration for you. I think what you're doing in terms of all your activity that you got going on is just superb. So congratulations on all that.
Well, thank you. I like to tell people two things. One, I didn't plan to do most of this stuff. A lot of it happened because other people said, Max, have you ever thought about trying? Or they challenged me to do something. I like to say that one of the best things that can happen is for a good friend to dare you to do something that scares you. So a lot of this I've done just because it was the next thing to do. But the other thing is I'm not really smart enough to get scared. So, I don't really focus on the huge things that I'm doing at the time. And, some people get mad at me when I say this. There are times when I have to be reminded, Max, back when you used to hand code HTML, that was a big deal. Or, Max, when you were one of the few legally blind Eagle Scouts, that was a big deal. So I really stay in the moment. I do what I'm working on today and don't really think, oh man, my book needs to be out in January and here it is May and I haven't even wrote the first, I don't think about stuff. I just do what I need to do today. And I don't know where that comes from. I really wish I could tell people where that comes from, but I sometimes think that maybe it's the vision loss. Maybe that has forced me to be more mindful over the years and focus in on what I'm doing right this minute. I don't know, but it is really important, and it's really hard to just focus in on what you're doing now and not think about all the deadlines you have, all the responsibilities you have, and how far it is to that big goal that you're chasing.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people can learn from you, and I love the podcast name of What's Your Excuse. Can you touch a little bit on that?
Right. Well, one, I didn't pick the name. I actually tried not to call it something with excuses in it, but I couldn't escape it. And once I realized I couldn't escape it, I said thank you to the people who gave it to me, and I ran with it. It's become a thing. And my only regret is not filing for the domain name back then, because somebody else has it. They want like $25,000 for it. But the What's Your Excuse actually came from people online who, they saw what I was doing, that I was willing to take on difficult challenges, work through the problems, just keep moving forward. And they said, if Max can do it, then what's my excuse? And it became a kind of a thing in the blog comments on my website. So a lot of times when it comes to branding or ideas, the ideas don't have to be yours. And sometimes the best thing you could do is just say thank you and move forward. So it's, think about it. In 2007, I'm a blind guy. I got no skills, no experience, no money. I don't have the first clue how to build a website. I'm going to start an online business. So I had to learn how to hand code HTML. Then I had to learn how to recruit clients and set fees and build an email list and eventually use social media. You know, I started before Facebook was a thing, before WordPress and even Wi-Fi. Just think about trying to build a website on a 56K modem, y'all. If any of y'all remember what that is. So, you know, it was like, okay, Max, how are we going to do this? You know, so sometimes the answer was hard work. Sometimes the answer was asking somebody else to help me do it or to do it for me. And so that's where the whole what's your excuse thing comes from. People have seen me basically say, this has to be done. There has to be a way to do it. I'm going to find that way to do it, and then I'm going to do it no matter how much I don't like it.
I mean, you mentioned the fact that you don't know where the busyness comes from, but do you know where the drive comes from to overcome hard tasks or what might be perceived as difficult tasks?
Right. Well, part of it is spending 15 years trying to drag a 7-ride carnival around the state of Texas, where most of the other competitors had 15 or 20 or 30 or more. So, you know, just the whole attitude of we're going to get to next week, we're going to make opening, because if we don't get open and if people can't buy a cotton candy and ride the Ferris wheel, there will be trouble. So, you know, you grow up with that mindset. And my entire family on my dad's side were in the business. So, you know, you see all your relatives doing it. You know, you see them working odd jobs in the wintertime, you know, selling Christmas trees, selling plush toys on the side of the road, whatever, so they can, you know, get ready to go out again next year. Mm-hmm. You grow up around people who did stuff who never really had time for anybody that was feeling sorry for themselves. And so you learn. My dad used to have an expression when we would get open, and me and him were usually the last team there, because with me being blind and him being our main driver, other people could set up the rides and the games. Me and him would just be, you know, we would be the last one to make sure everything finally got there. And sometimes, you know, we would have to be really creative, and people would come up to my dad and they'd go, "Hey, Max, how did y'all do that? You know, how did y'all get that 700-pound moonwalk on that truck by yourselves?" And you always just look at him and he'd go, "Hey, did we have a choice?"
So you got an upbringing of no excuses, basically.
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I don't know if you know David Rafe, but he's a friend of mine from the UK. He likes to say that the carnival business gave me a PhD in hustle and muscle.
Well, I want to ask you about so many different things, but before I do, I want to. Are there any questions that you get asked which you think, that's really annoying, I wish people wouldn't ask me that?
Yes, there is, and there's one that still annoys me, and there's one that used to annoy me. But the one that annoys me is going to surprise you. I'm annoyed when people ask me what are my plans for the future, because I usually don't know. You know, I like to say that sometimes God has better plans than I do, or bigger dreams than I do. So I said earlier how much I work to focus on what I'm doing now. I have a couple of goals. I want to travel more and do more public speaking. And my big goal right now is to launch this What's Your Excuse podcast network, where I'm going to help other people with disabilities start their own podcast. So that's my future thing. But that used to be my least favorite question from a host. They always would ask it at the end of the show, "What are your plans for the future?" I don't know. Honestly, didn't know most of the time.
Well, my question that I ask every episode is obviously, what are your goals? Is that just a variation of the same question?
It may be. I'm not 100% sure. One of the things I teach my students that I'm preparing to be podcast guests is you don't always have to know the answer. And sometimes the best thing to do is just to work through the answer while you're talking to the host. So it sounds like the same question.
All right, we'll pass on that one for today.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Just for you, that is.
All right.
But,
well, you can ask it again if you want to. I mean, I'm not guaranteeing I'll give you the answer you want to get or the answer the listeners want to get, but I'll answer it.
Well, it makes me think, coming back to the no excuses thing for a moment, and you being involved in self-development to some degree, do you ever listen to perhaps comments or stories of people and think, why are you making these excuses? You've got, if you look at yourself and how much you've done and versus maybe the typical complaints or stories people tell themselves, and think, do you feel any of that at all?
Occasionally I will feel it when my brother is reading some of the Facebook posts, but the thing is I don't generally gravitate towards stories like that. And here's the funny thing. You know how they say we attract the people that are like the person we are?
Yeah.
Most people that make excuses don't talk to me. They don't complain to me. Every once in a while, I will get an email from somebody who will say, Max, you've done so much and come so far. I feel depressed listening to you because there's no way I can do that. But most of the time, people who are, making excuses, finding reasons not to take action of any kind, they don't come near me. They stay away from me. So other than, the occasional news story and the occasional Facebook post that my brother reads from his feed, I really don't have those thoughts much because I just don't come in contact with them a lot. And I think that's a really good thing. I think it's something more people should aspire to. Like, when you get up in the morning, are you looking for news items or social media posts to get angry about, or are you looking for them to get supported and uplifted by? And the more you approach things with a positive attitude and an attitude of, I can do this, there's some way we can do this, whether it's me by myself or with help from others, it can happen. Then you don't run into, what do they call them, the Karens or the boomers? They stay away from you. And just to follow up on that, I don't want anybody to do this. I always preface this by saying I do not want a gremlin or a troll or a hater, but I've never had one. And I think it's just because I post with humility. I share the embarrassing stuff just as much as I share the positive stuff. My feed isn't all pictures of me with a smile on my face. Well, maybe it is because I don't take a lot of pictures, and sometimes it's hard to get other people to, but you know what I mean. The people I'm talking about. I'm not that kind of person. So I think that really helps a lot as far as who I attract to me. I mean, I post about about being in New York broke and not exactly sure how I'm going to get home, but I also post about selling a copy of my book in the airport. So I think that has a lot to do with why I just don't come in contact with people like that. I don't attract them. They don't reach out to me. I wish they would reach out to me. I would love to have a conversation with some of these people and go, come on. What is the excuse today? And give them like 4 or 5 options. The problem is most people, they want the solution that they want. They want the easy solution. And sometimes they want the solution everybody else is using. They think just because me and you are doing it a certain way, they have to do it that way. For example, before we went live, you mentioned that you will edit the video and crop out the extraneous stuff so I look even better on camera. I don't mind people knowing that. But me, I just press record. I talk to the person and I press stop. Whatever's on the camera is on the camera. So we have totally different approaches, but we both have great shows, great interviews, and wonderful audiences. So, that's, I think, what it comes down to is people want the solutions they want, or they want to do things the way everybody else is doing them. And most of the time it just comes down to going, hey, how can I do this that works for me? Do I want to do it that way? No. But if I do it that way, can I get to the next step? Yes. Then go ahead. I love telling people this about, our solutions. Life ain't the Olympics. They're not going to give us style points. So find the solution that gets you there. It probably, in the beginning, it probably will be dirty and greasy, and you probably will hate it. I mean, I give thanks at least once a week for WordPress because I used to have to build my website one line of stupid code at a time. But I did it because I had no other choice.
Mm-hmm.
So
I do want to get into that because it seems like a gigantic task in terms of being able to hand code or hard code from the beginning during the pre-WordPress. But before we do, I wanted to ask you about podcasting, because as much as we've talked about adversity, it makes me think that in relation to podcasting, it's, I would say, almost, and what's your opinion on this, you're on a level par with everyone else in relation to podcasting. Is that true to say?
I think you are on a level as long as you're willing to see yourself on the level. The problem with podcasters, with bloggers, with website builders, what the bottom line is the whole, is it good enough yet? So if you're willing to say, my podcast is good, whatever my skills are, I record my content and put it out in the world, then yeah, there's a level playing field. But if you're one of these people who says, I'm recording this thing on an 8-year-old MacBook, or I'm recording this with my iPhone, or I'm recording this, one of my favorite guys, Michael Fritzius, he records his podcast from the bed of his pickup truck because that was the only answer he had. So if you're willing to say, hey, my content is as good as everybody else's content, then yeah, it's level. But if you're one of these people who's making excuses and saying, my content isn't good enough because I don't have the tech yet, or I don't have the editing capabilities yet, or nobody's going to listen to me because there are 5 other shows like what I'm doing or want to do. So it really depends on mindset. Yes, when it comes down to it, if we are willing to put ourselves and our content out into the world, we're all equal. But if I see myself as a nobody and I see Tom as a rock star, I could never compete with that because I won't let myself compete with it. And I hope that didn't confuse anybody.
No, I think it's pretty clear. And I don't think my question was quite clear enough either, because I think if you take someone like yourself and I do look at you as a bit of a rock star and apply that to the podcasting world, I think that you have a massive advantage because, I'm presuming that you're just going to apply all of yourself to that. And whereas people who just look at it as just another thing, they may be disadvantaged because they just, this is just another thing I could do. Whereas you're going to, use your work ethic on it. And, I'm fascinated to see what happens with it is essentially what I was trying to get across.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if you, apply my work ethic or apply many other work ethics, I will be the first to tell you that I am not as dedicated or consistent as even I would like to be. But at the end of the day, I go, okay, Max, you can do better tomorrow. And some days tomorrow I do better. But if you apply the work ethic, I think the more important thing as far as podcasting goes is applying the curiosity factor. Who am I going to talk to today? What kind of conversations? What am I going to learn? And that's another really important thing about podcasting. If you go into podcasting, and I'm speaking about interview shows because it's different with monologue shows. If you go into podcasting, doing an interview show, and you don't expect to have aha moments, to learn things about the guest and to learn things about yourself, then you might as well not podcast. There's such a huge curiosity factor involved in doing this show as far as, who do I want? How do I get them to come on my show? What shows do I want to go on? What things do I want to talk about? What are they going to teach me from Africa or Canada or the UK? So there's just so much stuff that, that is unknown that you can learn. So I say, you have to apply the idea of wonder, of childlike curiosity to doing a podcast, and that makes it sustainable. So if you apply curiosity along with the work ethic and along with the determination that you are going to grow as a person as a result of doing your podcast, then it becomes sustainable.
Well, we touched a little bit on what the quote unquote disadvantages might be. What would you say your advantages are in terms of how you approach things?
Well, one, I don't really worry too much about how the stuff looks. I worry about how it sounds. But when it comes to the visual presentation, I approach it two ways. One, I do it as well as I can because I've got my camera set, my chair set, and I got my shirt, and my tie. And then I don't worry about it. The other thing is with visual stuff, I let other people do it, or I take advice from other people. Like I have a woman in Philadelphia who helps me with the recording space, who tells me I still have more work to do. So I think that my situation allows me to ignore some of the stuff that other people would get distracted by and that would keep them from starting or continuing their podcast.
So you got some focus.
Yeah, I got focus because of my lack of vision. Yeah, and that's something I'm told all the time. So it's and I wish more people would worry more about the content and the conversations and less about the technology and how it's going to look. Yeah, the audio is really important, but I think the other thing is I have learned over the years that our mistakes have as much, if not more, value than the stuff we get right. I mean, one of my most watched videos was a video I recorded for the blindblogger.net, and it was the very first video. Now, I have light perception, but I can only tell if the lights are on or off if I look directly where the light is supposed to be and then turn the switch. So I sat down and recorded this video without checking the light. I recorded it, posted it, was very proud of it, only to find out that I was sitting in a dark room. And half the people who saw that said, Max, it looks like you're sitting in a cave. You might want to re-record this and fix your lighting. The other half said, Max, what a wonderful metaphor. You're going to lead us out of the darkness into the light. It's a great metaphor. And I'm like, see, they saw what they wanted to see. Some people are going to see your flaws. Some people are going to see your flaws as a metaphor. But they can only do that if we put ourselves out there, if we share our mistakes, our flaws, our scars. That's how you connect with people. That's how you build a loyal audience. That's how you get to the point where if you don't post in a while, some of your followers will reach out to you and go, Max, are you okay? So I do think that embracing my mistakes and also knowing my limitations as a blind person when it comes to the visual appeal of what I'm doing and just saying the heck with it and doing it anyway. That's one of the big messages I like to share with people is knowing that it was maybe not your best or finding something that scares you and just doing it anyway.
I think that's that good peer group coming up again, which is a good example of it. But would you say that your hearing is better than the average person, and also perhaps your listening ability? Do you think that you listen to, the meaning of what people say a little bit more than most do?
Okay. I want to congratulate you on asking a question in a way that nobody has ever asked it before, but I love the second part even better than the first part. That is so representative of really understanding the person you're talking with. And that's something very few people can accomplish. I want to thank you for that. So
thank you.
The first part, I think my hearing is above average, but I think that's partly not exposing it to dangerous noise levels when I was a teenager, because I was never a rock music fan. And it's partly because of actually paying attention to what I'm listening to instead of paying attention to 7 different things. If you remember when we got ready to record, I turned off my screen reader and my phone and my tablet, so I'd only be listening to you. So it's part of it is focus, and part of it is protecting your ears because you know that they're very valuable to you. Mm-hmm. So that's the first question. The second part of your question is, other than today, because it seems like I've missed your meeting a couple of times, and I apologize for that. I must not be on my game today.
I very much doubt it's your fault somehow.
But usually people talk about my intuitiveness and how closely I listen and how well I put myself in the other person's place. I'm often complimented on empathy and understanding. So, yeah, I think my listening ability, or what Stephen Covey would call, what do you call it? Power listening or something like that. I think it is definitely improved because it's focused. But, there are there have been some recent scientific studies on vision loss or loss of other senses, like people who are deaf, and they've discovered something they're calling neural elasticity, which means that the brain has the ability to reroute its processing power to focus on the things it has and ignore the things it doesn't have. And when you consider that, depending on who you ask, 70 to 90% of the brain's processing is devoted to your vision. If you take that and then focus it on hearing, smell, taste, touch, then that's what the scientists are at least starting to believe is what happens there.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the listening and understanding the other person, that I think all comes from practice. But just think about this. Think about if you have an image on your phone and you make that image as good as you can. Well, and then you take the same image and you put it on your laptop, or then you take the same image and you put it on a supercomputer. You're going to get different images because you have different levels of computing power. And they're starting to believe the same thing is happening with the brain and with vision loss, that it's taking all that processing power it uses on images and focusing on other places.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in one of your messages to me, or perhaps on the profile that I read, you started off and you could see, but you lost your vision over time, but you also knew that would happen, and therefore you had time to prepare for it. Can you share a bit about your thinking process?
Right. Well, part of the thinking process was the people that I was surrounded by. I don't know about the UK, but in the US, the quality of your education depends on where you live, because the more affluent the neighborhood is, the more money the school usually has to spend. So at my school, they had people such as Braille instructors, orientation and mobility teachers, special education teachers who weren't just focused on pushing you through the system, but actually, helping you find ways to accomplish your learning tasks. So I was very blessed that way. Plus, you already know about my carnival family and how they, wouldn't have accepted my spending much time feeling sorry about things. But the gradual loss did help, because in one hand it helped, and in the other hand it made things more difficult. It helped because, like you said, I had time to prepare. I had a big drop off in vision when I was 12 or 13, so that was a surprise. But the other thing is that I never really knew what my level of vision was going to be from 1 month to the next, or 1 year to the next. So in the span of, say, 4 or 5 years, I went from being able to read a regular print book in darkroom to having to have lots of light, to having to use a magnifying glass, or borrowing large print books, eventually using a closed circuit television to blow up the words on the screen, and then finally having to go to audio and Braille. So that continually having to adjust to my vision level and how I would do things made me very adaptable and very flexible. And one of the things that, we try to get across to employers is that while blind employees may have limitations and may need accommodations, if they are at the point where they want work, you can really take advantage of the adaptability that many of us have and the creative problem solving that we bring to situations.
Oh yeah, definitely. I can imagine. Do you, you mentioned the fact that you want to help other people who are in the same position. Do you have many people who, see themselves as victims? I certainly can see that you don't feel that way, but how do you feel about that topic?
I think that, Oprah used to say that winning the lottery didn't change people. It only brought out the person they already were. And I kind of think it's that way with vision loss. There are just as many angry, depressed, excuse-making people who either because they started out that way, or because over time they've tried many things and failed to the point where, they are the opposite end of the spectrum. And I think there's, just as many people as out here like me who are hoping for better things. Just like, you see people from slums in Africa that turn out to be successful in business or movie or entertainment. And then you see people from wonderful families and neighborhoods here in the U.S. who end up on drugs. There's no real, if it's just, I wish we could figure out, what that switch is that causes people in similar situations. I mean, think about this. Here we are in the middle of the pandemic. Over the last year, we've had lockdowns, we've had shortages on toilet paper. We've had social unrest, we've had all this stuff going on. But at the same time, you have all these wonderful stories of people who have started businesses out of their home, people who have finally decided to paint, sculpt, write that first novel. So, how do you figure that out? What causes one person in the pandemic to start a soup kitchen and another person in the pandemic to live in a park in a box? We don't know. And it's the same thing with vision loss. We really don't know why some people it affects them or it doesn't affect them negatively, and other people it becomes the thing that drags them down. We don't really know. The one thing we do know is that me and you, we can do what we can. We can have great conversations like this, but we can't help people who don't want to be helped.
Yeah, 100% agree. Well, I do definitely want to touch on how on earth did you learn how to code? Because most people in the whole population don't know that. It's basically a story that falls into everything else I do. What I did was I knew I couldn't do what you see is what you get, which was the main option at that time. So I started asking online, and I kept asking, and finally somebody said, "Man, you need to go to the w3c.org school and go through their tutorials. And after you do that, then you can come back and ask us some smart questions." And so I took that to mean they were tired of me asking my dumb questions. But bit blunt.
So when you do the same thing over and over again, people that you are exposed to will tend to get a bit blunt. So I was happy they did it, actually. So, so what I did is I did what I do with a lot of things. I went there and I found out that, if you did this, you could create a page. If you did this, you could create a link. If you did this, you could create a thing where people click the thing and it lets them send you an email. So I learned it one little piece of code at a time. Embedding images, embedding videos, what else? Creating new pages and link pages between pages. So I did it one little piece of code at a time. And then as I started building my website, I went back to some of the people who, were blunt with me, and they would share some of their PHP code or some of their, some of their JavaScript code with me, so I didn't have to do that. But it was just like, okay, there has to be a way I can do this. W3C thing sounds like the way. I went there, I would look at their examples, and I realized, that it's all you have to do is think about a mirror, because with code, as long as both sides are the same, you're usually okay. And, you have to be really focused on doing everything with your screen reader going character by character, because if you miss one period, slash, less than or greater than, the whole thing breaks, or at least the whole page you're working on breaks if you're not working on the main page. And so, that's the way I did it. I did it one line at a time, sometimes at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And sometimes those less than or greater than started to run together in my ears. But and when I would complain about it to my sighted friends, they would go, "Max, it's worse if you can see it." And I would go, "What do you mean it's worse if you can see it?" They said, "Well, when you get tired, those less than and greater than start to look like rhombuses." And I'm like, okay. So the most difficult thing I had to do was with embedding images, because a lot of times the image, the label I had given the photo wasn't acceptable to HTML code back then. Back then you couldn't put a dash or a space or unusual characters in a file name if you wanted to add it to your website. So sometimes I would forget, and then I'd have this big blank space in a page, and people would go, and I would show it to people and ask, okay, how does this look? And they go, well, Max, you know, the picture that's supposed to be there, it ain't there. So sometimes I would have to do add a photo to my website 3 or 4 times before I'd finally get it right. But I think this all goes back to the way I do things. And, you know, I hope that this is the one message people get, is that when you're approaching a big problem, do what you can, you know, do those little bitty things that will eventually add up to a big thing. And that's what I did with my website, to the point where, you know, now other people who look at it go, man, this is a monster. This is a Frankenstein, but it works. And can I tell my website color story? It's my favorite story. You mind if I tell that one?
Definitely.
Okay. I'm blind. So when it came to picking the colors for the website, I thought, okay, for those of you who don't know, there are 2 ways to pick colors on a website. There's what's called the hexadecimal number system, and you can use words. Well, I had no idea what numbers went with what colors. So I thought I'll just go with the names, and I picked yellow for the background, because back when I could see, I remembered that the toys and stuff on the games looked better on yellow than they did on white. I chose blue for the text, red for link text, and orange for previously clicked link text. And I thought I was doing good until somebody came along and said, you know, Max, that yellow is ice creaming yellow, your blue is navy, your red is brick, and your orange is a fluorescent orange, like something you see on the side of a NASCAR or a Formula One car. And basically, over the years, people have told me that the website is so bright that Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder could argue over it. You know, it was bad, but I focused on what I could do, which was recruiting equipment, posting the equipment on the website, promoting the equipment through emails and social media. And that got off a looking website, sold hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of rides on 5 continents before we finally moved it to WordPress and made it a little more conventional.
Cool. Great story. So what about this? Oh, and before I move on, I wanted to highlight a principle, because you started in that answer, you started with one thing, which is a one thing at a time, I think was your answer. And there's a phrase in self-development, which I'm sure you've heard, which is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Yeah,
one bite at a time.
You also highlighted on the fact that when people look at HTML code, you get all this kind of, you know, oh my goodness, look at all that. It's gibberish essentially to most people. But if you're focusing on one character, as you say that you did, probably less intimidating, right?
Yeah, and that's the way everything is. If you can focus in on the little goal that you have today, then the big goal that's down the road won't scare you as much. You know, and that's the way I do things. When I sit down to write, I sit down to write for 5 minutes. When I go to ride my stationary bike or my bike that doesn't go anywhere, I sit down to ride for 15 minutes. You know, I don't ever say I'm going to do okay, very, very rarely will I say, okay, by the end of this year, I'm going to do this, because I just don't think about that. I'm like, okay, here's generally where I want to go, and these are some of the things I can do, and then I start doing them. And actually, I have what I like to call my 4 questions method, because what I like to do is I like to think about at least once. I don't do this very often because it scares most people, and I tell them that in my first book, Leading You Out of the Darkness into the Light, A Blind Man's Inspirational Guide to Success. I tell them that when you look at the big goal, it's going to scare you, but you have to do it once. When you decide on what your goal is and you make a list of everything you think you will need to do, have, or accomplish before you get there. So I say, make that list. And then for each one, ask yourself these questions. Can I do it? So if that one little piece is something you can do, you take action on it today or this week. You don't talk about it or think about it or ask somebody else about it. Just do it. If you can't do it, then can you learn how to do it? And if you can learn how to do it, then start watching the podcast. Reach out to the mentor, sign up for the course. You know, if you can't do it and you can't learn how to do it, then can you get somebody else to do it for you? And if you can get somebody else to do it, then start that. And when I say somebody else, I mean friends, family, volunteers, reaching out on social media, saying yes if somebody comes along and offers to help you, paying people to help you. And one of the great things about being humble about my goals is a lot of times people will do things for me for less than what they would usually charge, or on an installment basis, or in exchange for something I'm good at, like getting them on podcasts. So if you can't do it, learn how to do it, or get somebody else to do it, then ignore it. Put it off to the side and focus on the things that you actually have some level of control over, and start doing those small things. Do at least one of those small things every day. And eventually you'll look up and, it might be a month or a few months later, and you'll think, wait a minute, I am a different person than I was when I started this. Maybe there's some things that I didn't have on my list to begin with. And maybe there's some things that on my original list I said I couldn't do, but now maybe I can do them. Maybe I can learn, or maybe there's somebody in my community now who can help me by doing it for me. So that's the way I approach it. I break it down into as many little bitty steps as I can, and then I work on what I can do. And if I can't do it, fine. Nobody can do all this stuff by themselves, so I don't worry about it.
Great point. It's another productivity point, breaking things down into its, in micro goals, I think they're referred to as.
Yeah.
But there's so much here that I want to talk to you about. Traveling cross country solo. What is that like?
Well, it works different people would approach it differently. Me, I feel like as long as I expect to meet good, helpful people, those are the people I will meet. And I don't obviously usually put myself in dangerous situations, but I've been very lucky. So when I travel, I depend on the staff of the plane, train, or bus company. I ask people around me if they will help me find the next place I need to go to, or if they will lead me there. I stay open to new activities or experiences. So sometimes I stay with people in their homes. Sometimes I've stayed in a hotel. I've stayed in a hostel. I'm basically very flexible because, I have all those years traveling around the country and, kind of old, kind of distressed travel trailer. So my standards aren't real high, but when it comes to traveling, I like to say, and I've said this many times, when I visited New York for the first time in 2016, I traveled all over that city going from one person's shoulder to the next person's shoulder. I went sighted guide and met a lot of great people, an exchange student from Vietnam, a B&B host from Florida who was in New York visit as a tourist himself, a woman who invited me to come on her podcast, and just the people I met on the ferry or at whatever building. So I even got help from the Secret Service guy at Trump Tower. So it's basically I'm not one of those uber independent blind people, and I think that really makes it easier for me when I travel by myself. And I think this leads into
people along the way.
Yeah, and I think this leads into one of my most important lessons, which is we're not intended to do this stuff by ourselves, and that we really need to ask for help more or to accept help when it's offered to us. Those two things will make accomplishing those big goals so much easier. And I like to try to get people to take the focus off of themselves and think about the other person. And I have this expression that I like to share, which is, when you refuse to ask, you rob the other person of the joy they would have received from helping you.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah. So I like people to think, hey, I'm making the other guy's day harder by not asking, or I'm making my life harder if I don't accept it. And for most people, it's very difficult to ask for help because they feel embarrassed. They feel like they should be able to do all this stuff on their own. And we have a very negative view of people who ask for help in this world. So it's hard for people to do it. And I hope that the expression helps them by taking the focus off of themselves and thinking about how good they feel when they do something for somebody else. But I find the more difficult thing is to accept help, because if somebody comes along and volunteers to do something for you, the immediate response is ego. People get offended. They're like, who the heck do they think they are? I don't need their help. I'm doing just fine as I am right now. So they should take themselves off and go help somebody who really needs it. And in that case, I try to remind people, look, it took them more courage to offer to help you than it would take you to ask somebody. So, I like to remind people, look, when somebody offers to help you, they are showing real courage and they're showing real love for another person. In many cases, a person that they only know through the internet. So try to remember that when somebody does offer. And the great thing that I've learned is that when you ask for help and you take the advice or do the work, you build friendships. When people offer to help you and you accept their help and you work together to solve a problem in your life, you build relationships. And those things last much longer than the problem does.
Well, the next one is the biggest fear that individuals have. I'm wondering what the process of public speaking was like for you, and also singing in public. I'm half tempted to ask you for a little bit of a sing here, but we'll start with public speaking.
Well, let's put it this way. You don't have to be tempted because, as I tell people all the time, if somebody considers themselves a singer, don't ask them to sing because they will sing. You can ask a singer who's just got out of intensive care if they want to sing, and trust me, the answer will be yes. And in fact, for me, singing is harder than public speaking. But let's talk about your first question first. Public speaking, I had a great conversation with another blind speaker last night for my podcast, What's Your Excuse? And we talked about this, and he agreed with me, which is, as a blind person, I don't have the intimidation of looking out into an audience. I mean, I can't see y'all. My biggest fear when I speak is that people are going to be quiet, that they're not going to laugh or have some sort of response within the first few minutes that I'm talking. Because, as you know, when I speak and when I have conversations, I am pretty funny. So if they don't laugh, then I get a little, if they're quiet, then I get a little worried, which is one of the reasons why I don't really care for doing virtual talks on Zoom, because I can't see the audience and I can't hear them either. So I'm really not a big fan of virtual speaking on Zoom. It's not my favorite thing, but I will do it. But the other thing is, when I speak, I really don't have enough space in my brain to think about the talk. For me, I'm focused on putting one foot in front of the other, going down the aisle or up the ramp. I'm thinking about getting myself positioned correctly so I'm facing the audience. I'm thinking about, if I do decide to move at all, am I going to end up off the stage? And, I'm thinking about the microphone, my first words, wanting to make sure that I sound good through the PA. So I'm thinking about those sorts of things, focused on the mobility part of getting to the mic and starting my talk. And so I don't really think too much about the fear of giving the talk. And I think that also applied to my traveling solo, because you only have so much space in your brain. You can't worry about everything. So for me, I don't really think too much about the talk, and it comes off sometimes that I'm not nervous. And maybe I'm not nervous, or maybe it's just that I'm controlling my nerves by being mindful and focusing on the next minute or the next 3 minutes. So that really helps me. But some people have mentioned that I don't look like I'm nervous. It looks like I'm doing just another thing. So maybe I am. I think a little bit helps that I'm a storyteller. So when I go up there, I'm not trying to read, really strictly prepared remarks. I'm not having to read off of a script or a teleprompter, but I am having to read from my memory. And, when I give talks, I basically think, okay, I'm going to give this talk. Who am I talking to? And what stories I'm going to tell. So my stories are like, an MP3 playlist. As long as I, know what stories I'm going to tell, then, I really don't have to worry about my speech part, because as I tell people, when you're doing a podcast interview or when you're giving a talk based on your own experiences, you really shouldn't worry about questions because nobody knows that story better than you know. So public speaking, I don't have to, the staring into the lights doesn't bother me. I'm not trying to find a friendly face out there. Oh, and the one most important thing is when y'all do public speaking, remember this. This is the most important thing I can tell you about public speaking. People don't go to a conference to heckle you. They go there hoping you're going to share at least one thing that will improve their lives when they get back to their homes. Same thing when you do a virtual talk. People aren't there. It's not open mic night at the Laugh Hut. They are there to be educated, inspired, motivated. They're hoping you're going to say something great. And if you think about it from that point of view, why should you be scared?
Well, I've often said that, if you're just having a conversation, just talking with one person, you're basically, it really doesn't matter how many people you're talking to.
Yes.
The action is the same.
Yes.
It's just perception, right?
Yes, I love that. And that feeds into one of my favorite quotes, which is from Star Wars, and it's from the second of the first three. I say it that way because I'm never sure which movie is which. But Yoda tells when Luke crashes his ship on Dagobah, Yoda tells him to lift it, and Luke says, "I can't. It's a huge ship." And Yoda says, there is no big or small. There only is. And so what you just said, is something I definitely believe in. People, when you think about talking and sharing your story with somebody you met in a coffee shop, that's okay. When you think about sharing the same story with 500 people, that's scary. But it's no different. Just like you just said, it's the same thing. It's just our mind playing tricks on us, making us think it's harder or scarier than it should be. But like I said, like Yoda said, there is no big or small.
Well, I'm going to try and ask you a tough question.
No, wait a minute. I got to talk about singing. I got to talk about singing first because it's one of the most important things I do.
Okay.
For the reason that it allows me to live my talk, and I hope you don't mind me breaking in on you there.
Definitely, if it's going to involve some tunes, then I definitely don't mind. Okay.
Here's the thing. As I was I lost a lot of vision when I went to what we call junior high school over here. My voice started to change. And so people for a while didn't like my voice. People would tell me not to sing. In fact, at a choir competition, the other singers told me to just lip sync because they thought my voice was that bad at that point. So for years, I was ashamed of my voice. I was afraid to sing in my own living room if somebody else would walk from one of the other rooms and be able to hear me. And I would either start singing more softly or quit altogether. So I didn't like it. But about 8 years ago, when I wanted to record my first video for the Midway Marketplace, I knew I had to have an intro of some kind, but I didn't have a way to create it. So I thought, okay, Max, you used to love to sing. People used to like your voice a long, long time ago. So why don't you try singing as your intro and see what that does? So this was in December. I was trying to get my first video out before the new year. And so I did a little bit of Nat King Cole's A Christmas Carol, and people liked it. They told me that I should do more of that. And so I continued singing on the intros of my videos. I would change it depending on what I was talking about. And then eventually I started recording myself singing covers of country and older pop music. And people liked that. A little while back, I recorded a country song called Better Together by Luke Combs. And I didn't like the lyrics in his chorus, so I changed the lyrics. Mm-hmm. And then a friend of mine challenged me to write a song. Note that I was challenged to write a song, y'all, by a really good friend. And I said, well, I don't know how to write a song. And she said, well, Max, why don't you do it the way you do everything else? Why don't you try writing one verse? Or why don't you try writing a few notes or a few words? And so I did that. Next thing I know, I've got this song called If You Don't Ask, which is based in my whole thing is if you don't ask, they can't say yes. It's the most memorable quote that I'm known for. And I recorded the song and people love the song. A few have said it's even gotten stuck in their head. And more importantly, there are people who say that the song makes a better case for asking for help than anything I can say with my words, which is amazing for a guy who used to be scared. I'm still scared. I still get nervous every time I press record or every time I sing in public, but I know it's important because I'm showing other people, hey, this scares the heck out of me, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because one, I love doing it. And two, it's the one thing I know I can do that will help other people the most. So really, I still scared by it, but I do it anyway. And if you don't mind, I'd like to sing some of that song. It's a really cool song. Would you like to hear some of it?
I'd love that.
I hate busting into because it's a really solid message in it, both what I say about it and how I do it. So I hope you're not mad at it.
No, of course not. I asked, so I'm interested. I'm excited to hear.
Well, you hit it. Well, you hinted. You said you were tempted, and I just had to pull you on over the cliff. So, all right. If you don't ask, they can't say yes. They can't help you move or write you a check. They can't walk your dog or hug your neck. If you don't ask, they can't say yes. If you don't ask, they can't say yes. They can't bring you coffee or breakfast in bed. They can't read your thoughts, so don't make them guess. If you don't ask, they can't say yes. I do. Would they have me on the British Got Talent?
Oh, you're way too good for that show. Don't bother with that.
Thank you so much, sir.
That was amazing. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. But I sat down and did that in a few hours in my bedroom, just kind of playing around, with words and music. And I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And the songwriters in here are like, Max, it needs to have some music, and I'm like, okay, but if you think it needs to have this, then you need to help me make it have that, because I'm not going to do it that way, because it's, that part of it feeds into my no excuses approach, which is, yeah, it could be better. There are things it doesn't have, but what it does have is, is my message and my effort and doing something that I'm like, I never done that before.
That was great. I'm not a real Tony guy with my voice, but big smile all the way through it, just to let you know.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's something else most hosts wouldn't think to do, to mention the visual cues that I missed out on. And that actually reminds me of something. I gave my last public talk in person was at PodFest last spring in Orlando. And I gave a really good talk, and I could hear people applauding. But if the host hadn't walked over and said, Max, they're giving you a standing ovation, you might want to react to them. I wouldn't have known that. So thanks for telling me that you were smiling as I was singing. That's very important. No,
I loved it. So rather than asking you about your goals, you said that you're not not at all really, you don't fear public speaking. So what is the biggest fear for you?
I think the biggest fear is that a couple of them. There will stop being new things to do or new ways to do what I'm doing. And I don't think that will happen because, like I mentioned earlier, with podcasting, there are always new guests and new technology, new social media. So there's always stuff like that. I think the thing that really scares me, and this is the most honest thing I have said about it, I don't say this often, but the thing that really scares me is that people will get tired of hearing my stories. That's the one thing that scares me.
I only have anecdotal experience, but based on your interview today, I very much doubt that will be the case.
All right. Well, because how it is with us creatives, we all feel a little bit like we're a fraud, at least some of the time. We have days where we feel like, man, we're doing great work, but why did this have to happen? So for the most part, I think I'm doing a good job in my own life and being an example for other people to overcome their excuses. But there are the occasions where I'm like, Max, you really need to think about some of the things you're doing. Like for example, my nephew recently pointed out to me that I was using way too much cream and sweetener in my coffee, and that when he said that, it offended me. And I thought, wait a minute, if that offends you, then you're too attached to your coffee. So I'm on a thing now where I'm going to go at least a month without having any tea or coffee, and go strictly with water and see how that works for me. So far, it seems to be working really well. But, that's one of those things where it's like, okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to record, I need to have my coffee, I'm going to do an interview, I'm going to hang out with my friends. And it has really become something that has to be there. And this caused me to think, well, does it have to be there? So I think that's, even with me, I'm always like, there's something I could do better, or there are things I'm doing that aren't helping me that I could eliminate. And I wish more people would find the time. I know it's hard to find that time in our busy lives, but really to sit down and make a list of things you've accomplished so that you can feel good about how far you've come. But then those things that maybe, not just things you could do better, but things you're doing, or excuse me, as my good friend Alex Corgi likes to say, successful people don't find more things they could do. They find things they're doing that they don't need to keep doing. They eliminate the stuff that's dragging them down or pulling them backwards.
Like a 80-20 principle.
One of these days I'm going to read one of these big boy books and learn some of these words. And I think that's probably part of my success is I don't really know or appreciate what I'm doing half the time because I didn't bother to read the book. I started doing the work, and then after I did the work for a while, I read the book, but I still don't know about this 80-20 stuff. So,
well, I actually do think that reading lots and lots of self-development, when you take it to its extreme, can actually get in the way of the doing. So I think you're probably on the right end of that scale.
Yeah. One of the things that I have learned from my own podcasting experience is when it comes to starting a podcast, there are two ways to have a really good podcast. Now, you can prepare, you can do the market research on your niche. You can get the perfect artwork and figure out who your avatar is. You can record 3 months worth of shows. You can do the pre-launch on social media and email. You do all that stuff and have a great podcast. Or you can just start recording and interviewing people and putting your work out into the world. And a few months later, as you've gotten better and better each time you press record, then you've built an audience. You can do it either way. Me, I prefer to get good by being bad for a while. That's the way I like to do it. And in fact, Chris Kermitsis, who is the host of Podfest, he recently published a book called Start Ugly, and I couldn't be more in love with the book title. Because it's basically how I've done everything that I've done in my life since I quit being a carnival owner.
Yeah, there's a book as well, or a principle, a quote, I think, which says, "Start now and get perfect later." And I think that pretty much embodies what you said.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much. There's plenty of people that are looked to as an authority, or people, look up to them, but I hope you don't mind me saying you're an inspiration to me. So no, I don't mind that at all. I actually love that I'm able to be an inspiration to somebody who is as accomplished as you are, and somebody who's actually taking action and not making excuses. The only time I mind when somebody calls me an inspiration is when they call me an inspiration, I want to know, what did I inspire you to do? Because to me, inspiration without action is meaningless. Well, from my perspective, I feel like, at least relative to other people, I've done a lot. But when I look at you, I think there's so much more for me to do. So that's why you inspire me as an individual.
I'm laughing because when I come on a show, when I talk to other more established podcasters, I always feel the same way. I always feel like, man, you have only scratched the surface, and there's so much you're just really getting wrong that eventually you're going to learn. But I think that's the great thing. My friend Mara Sweeney, who's one of my really close, true friends that I met through a virtual summit, actually. She's known as the happiness ambassador. She says, Max, really good friends are the kind of people who inspire each other. So I think that, and of course, one of the great things about doing a podcast interview like this is after spending an hour and a half talking with each other and you hearing me sing, we've begun a friendship. We've begun a relationship from however many thousand miles it is from Houston to the UK. And, that's something that that you can't do through social media or email. And we have done that through our conversation. And so I feel like we are friends who can inspire each other, because I really, I have a real hard time with the whole idea that I am inspirational. I understand it now. I'm happy with it. I love the fact that I can do it. But it's just one of those things. I'm like, hey, I'm a Kearney kid who has done some things because he really didn't think he had a choice not to do them, or because they sounded fun, or because the right person asked him. I see people like you, more accomplished people who have done it in the world of coaching, speaking, etc. And I think, that's where I want to be. I still have so much more to accomplish. So I appreciate you calling me an inspiration. I'm happy that I can do it. And who knows, maybe in 20 or 30 years, I'll understand it.
Well, we better get busy working on what we're gonna do. So,
all right.
Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, sure. And is this where I tell people where they can find me?
Well, that would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Max, where is the best place for people to find you?
This is one of my highlights of the interview, because I did a talk a couple of years ago where somebody in the audience had to remind me to mention my book. So it happens. An author should never have to be reminded to mention their book. That shouldn't happen. They can go to theblindblogger.net, theblindblogger.net. They can send me an email at justask@theblindblogger.net. They can find me on almost all the social media as Maxwell Ivey. But the main thing is the internet. As far as the podcast, it's called What's Your Excuse? It also is on the website. You can tell Alexa, Google, you can say, play What's Your Excuse? And they will play the latest episode of the podcast for you. We're now on iHeart, which is really cool. We're on Roku. But really, the main thing is go to the website, sign up to the email list, and use my contact form. Because here, the one thing I would love to have happen today as a result of this conversation with Tom is I'd love to have at least one person that's watching this reach out and say, hey, Max, I saw you on The Ethical Marketer. I like some of the stuff you said. Some of the other stuff you said sounded like you was talking out your butt. But I'd like to talk to you, Max, or, cheers, or, maybe someday we'll have a pint, whatever. Just reach out to me, because I am never going to be one of those people that you have to be ready to hire a book or buy something from to talk to. Because I honestly believe that every time I open that inbox, that I'm going to have the opportunity to make a new friend or receive a new opportunity. So I do hope people understand that I'm sincere about this. I don't just give out my website, I give out the email, and I encourage people to reach out to me, because that's where all this starts. And I do hope that you, the people listening, that is, will find the courage to say, hey, or, reach out. And remember that my whole thing is, if you don't ask, they can't say yes. So I'm kind of flexible that way. I'm not going to say yes to everything. I'm not going shark diving with anybody anytime soon. But last night I had a guy on my podcast who asked me, he said, Max, can I play a little sax on your intro instead of you singing? I said, that's a reasonable request, so we'll go for it. So on my next episode, people are going to hear some New Orleans jazz instead of Max singing on the intro of the podcast. So please go to the website, say hi, tell me what you're going through, mention some of the problems or solutions. And if I have a way that I can help you, I will. And if I can't, I will tell you straight up I can't, and maybe I know somebody who can.
Well, coming back to just something that you mentioned briefly about the song being looping around in your head, it is happening right now. So
really? You're kidding.
I'm not kidding.
Um,
And when I watch this over again, it's going to reinforce that. So
yeah. Or you can go to my YouTube channel, YouTube/Maxwell Ivey, and it's on there. I've written a fourth verse that I need to re-record so that people can hear that. Would it be okay if I finish the show with the new verse?
Oh yeah, definitely.
All right, cool. All right, y'all. I'm through talking now, and when I'm through singing, it's going to be the end. Okay, so if you don't ask, they can't say yes. They can't help you clean up your latest mess. They can't give you answers to your life's tests. If you don't ask, they can't say yes.